Well, have you ever thought about living in the raw elements, like in a jungle or a tropical rainforest? Well, for real, that's exactly what I did. Hi, and welcome to another chapter of Natasha's Journey. I'm sitting here in the most tropical setting that I could find. It's next to a creek, which you might hear birds chirping and airplane going over. You might hear all those nature sounds. So I'm going to tell you about what it's like to live in the tropics. So you'll feel right at home as you experience tropical rainfall in the northeastern United States or in one of the countries in Europe that's experiencing torrential rainfall. And this is my story. It was back in the Vietnam era, and I was a new bride, just married to a young man who had emerged from 8 years of college and medical school. At that time, 95% of medical doctors finishing their internship were drafted into one of the armed services of the United States and was assigned to a tour in Vietnam. That left 5% of the lucky ones who would be assigned either a continental U.S. assignment or a non-con assignment. The latter is what we were lucky enough to get. Well, and this is why. To fulfill his language requirement in college, my husband had taken 2 years of Spanish, and that is the very detail that delivered us to the Panama Canal Zone, Fort Gulick Army Base on the remote Caribbean side of the Isthmus of Panama on the shores of Lake Gatun. During that first year of his internship, we had gotten married, and he was honored with a 1-year pediatric residency deferment offered by what was called the Berry Plan. During that year, we made the decision to have a baby in case he would be killed in action in Vietnam, which could have happened. I wanted to have his baby. So 6 weeks after he began basic training at Fort Sam Houston in Texas, our first son was born. I accompanied him to San Antonio for the basic training. Then he shipped out to Panama, and I went back home to wait for approval of my orders to join him. As an officer in the U.S. Army, and because he had extended his tour from the required 2 years to the voluntary 3 years, we were granted on-base housing. Fort Gulick is in the middle of the Darien jungle of central Panama and on the edge of the tropical rainforest. Fort Gulick had 3 purposes. It was the site of the 8th Special Forces Airborne Group, the Jungle Operations Training Center that prepared junior officers in jungle warfare, including how to avoid foot fungus caused by constant wet feet and socks. That was to prepare them for their assignments in Vietnam, which is, of course, also jungle warfare. The Escuela de las Americas was a military training school specifically for Central and South American military dignitaries to study warfare, strategy, and other military topics. So, sitting side by side in the classrooms were military leaders who were enemies at home. These military leaders were allowed to bring their families. So our neighbors could be the wives of juntas from, say, the Argentine military or possibly Honduras. It was a culturally diverse social setting that opened my eyes to tolerance and hospitality in general. My husband served as the post surgeon, so that also entailed ceremonial military social functions that taught me so much about military life in peace and especially in war. We were further blessed by the native Panamanian people, both the indigenous natives as well as the Kuna Indians of the San Blas Islands that were on the eastern side of Panama in the waters off Venezuela. They were such humble and service-oriented people. The women wore native attire centered around the blouses they made out of colorful handmade molas. I brought home a collection of molas that are one of my most treasured things. We also appreciated local art that was considered pre-Columbian, pieces that were made out of earthen dies painted on hand-carved wooden pieces. Here's a photo of my favorite batea that I brought home. It's about 2 feet in diameter. This vintage wooden plate is called a batea in the country of Panama, and it's made out of lightweight hardwood, mahogany or amargo, and decorated with pre-Columbian art. Well, this video is supposed to be about living in an area that gets heavy rainfall, so I'd better keep to the script. The dry season in Panama is between December and March, when it typically only rains once a day. During the rest of the year, the heavy downpours occur intermittently all day, with bursts of sunshine between the drenchings. The temperature rarely goes above 84 degrees Fahrenheit and rarely gets below 72 degrees, so it's pretty much room temperature all the time. But the constant high humidity makes the air feel heavy and even to the point of being difficult to breathe. As a sidebar, the beautiful aspects of Panama are the wild animals, bountiful fruit trees that grow wild, and the many tropical flowers that freshen the air with sweet fragrances. There are also wondrous birds and abundant sea life, including crocodiles, Portuguese man-of-war, barracuda, and land-loving animals like the ever-friendly sloth and the sinister fer-de-lance snakes. The trees are usually filled with monkeys and quadrumudes, while the iguanas and chameleons prefer to occupy the habited areas on the ground. It wouldn't be surprising for me to find a chameleon sitting on my bicycle seat, which happened more than once. The pests include humongous cockroaches, both black and albino, so as to blend in with painted interiors of houses. They were a nuisance more than anything else, so I would keep the kitchen light on during the night when I went to fetch a nighttime bottle for the baby, just so I didn't see them scurrying about to safety when I turned the light on. Of course, we also had mosquitoes, and they sprayed right along the streets with DDT once a week. So we were exposed to that toxin. Typically, the air conditioning was not available and not necessary because the houses were built with open screened windows with wooden slats that opened and shut. There were usually lengthy overhangs on each floor to keep the rain from coming in the screens. Most houses were built on stilts with parking, the outdoor laundry facility, and the maids' quarters on the ground level, and the main living quarters on the second floor, and bedrooms on the third floor. Here are some photos of the actual houses that we lived in. They were duplexes with 2 families living side by side. We had a mango tree and a banana tree in our yard. A neighbor had an avocado tree that had 3 crops of varying sizes of avocados all the time. We had so many avocados that we enjoyed coming up with new recipes like avocado ice cream and avocado soup. Fruit grew plentifully, but vegetables, that was another story. All the fresh vegetables were grown by the Chinese, who were the green thumbs of vegetables. The carrots were short and squatty. Lettuce was small heads, no leaf lettuce. The Chinese garden was just outside the base, and that made it convenient to shop. Otherwise, we bought most everything else at the commissary, or we'd send home for things. Choices were limited, and after 3 years of not having to make decisions about what to buy, no choices of color of toilet paper, it was always white, and leaving that secure army life was traumatic. And I can understand what soldiers go through returning to civilian life and experiencing PTSD. I had a lesser degree of that malady myself. By the way, we didn't have television either. However, we did watch the 1969 moon landing at a friend's house who had a small, fuzzy, black and white TV with an antenna. We had a bowling alley, a theater, and a swimming pool, and a nice golf course. But the weather was so heavy with humidity and rain, it was spotty if you could even get 18 holes in at one time. My second son was born during that 3-year period, and the hospital had no air conditioning, nor did it have a resident anesthesiologist. So, au naturel was all that was offered. The hospital, called Coco Solo, was deep in the jungle and was not hygienic nor sanitized. It was dirty and filled with critters from the surrounding jungle. Some of the mothers-to-be opted to return to the States to have their babies, but since it wasn't my first baby, I braved the elements. Well, now to the meat of the matter. Each house had a moat surrounding the periphery, and each moat was connected to the next house, and the moats eventually emptied into the closest waterway or ditch that drained into either Lake Gatun or Limon Bay, or one of the rivers. Even with all the rainfall, there was seldom evidence of standing water, and flooding never encroached the houses. It would just disappear down the concrete moats. The moats were about a foot across and maybe 6 inches deep, and could easily be stepped over. Because it rained so often and the humidity was always dripping from our bodies, we wore very loose-fitting, sparse clothing, no pantyhose or sweaters or long-sleeved blouses. I don't even remember wearing long pants. Well, makeup ran on your face, so that was sparsely applied. Hair was either worn short and straight or naturally curly if you were gifted with that, or long in a ponytail. So there was no glamour or chic anything. Life was simple. As the prophesied end times texts have declared, the areas that are desert will turn lush green, and the tropical areas will become dry. Revelations 5 verse 14 says, "The heavens receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place." End quote. So we can see with the current weather patterns turning everything upside down, it would behoove authorities and city planners to get busy and heed the forecasters that seem to support the prophecies that show inundating rainfall in areas that are not built for heavy rain. Because I do believe that will soon become the norm. And if you ask those living in the Northeast United States right now, that has already begun. If Earth does turn on its side and roll over, as the Bible scriptures say, we don't really know for sure where the North Pole will end up and where our new equator will be located. If you now live in a temperate zone, you may end up in the tropics, and this information will enlighten your expectations. What I didn't tell you about before in this video was the tumultuous time it was living in a country that despised the United States and its citizens, yet worshipped her at the same time. The Canal Treaty was being negotiated, and Panama did not want the U.S. to have sovereignty over the destiny of her people. The day I arrived in Panama, October 11th, 1968, the country was in the middle of a military coup by the counterinsurgents or the revolutionaries who overthrew the government of the newly elected president Arnulfo Arias. That coup ushered in 2 decades of dictatorship and drug smuggling, first by Omar Torrijos and then by Manuel Noriega. As one of my prophecies stated, friends will become foes, and that surely happened on that day. The only worse time for an American to live in Panama would have been December 20th, 1989, when the U.S. invaded Panama in what was referred to as the Operation Just Cause that deposed the dictatorship of Manuel Noriega because of indictments against him on drug trafficking and murder charges. But October 11th, 1968 was just as harrowing as I landed in Panama with my infant son and accompanied by military escort as my husband and I and our baby drove through the Republic. I was alarmed at seeing armed military guards with bayonets attached to their weapons, standing on every corner. Beginning the next day, all military personnel were put on alert, and everyone was quarantined to base, and all military dependents who lived in the Republic of Panama were either brought to base or shipped home. And that's a story that I'll share with you in another video. Well, I hope this little excursion on the topic of jungles of Panama gives you a glimpse of what your climate might end up being. Whether we have a geological pole shift or not, we should prepare for the worst and pray for the best. Survival may become our focus, and community will supersede individual needs and wants. Thank you for watching, and please leave your comments about the video so I know what your thoughts are and your feelings. May God bless you and keep you safe. I am Natasha.